Well, I have to tell everyone I really love chalkboards. Chalkboards are one of my favorite things.
This is not a chalkboard.
Dry erase boards are a very distant second.
Oh.
I don't know how many of you are aware of this. When the Supreme Court makes a decision, they have to write out an opinion of the court. At least one of the judges has to write out, here's all the reasons why we made this decision that we made. And then any judge who disagreed with the decision can write a dissenting opinion, and so they write that all out with all their reasons why they don't agree with the opinion. So as that happens with, I believe, all the cases, in this same court case, the gay marriage issue, the Obergefell versus Hodges case, you can read the court's opinion about why they made this decision that they did. You can also read the dissenting opinions. I believe, was it the 4 judges who dissented? I believe each one of those judges wrote a dissenting opinion. I would recommend to each of you that you find that document and read it. It is very interesting. I don't think in the past I would have said a court document could be of any interest, but this document is actually very interesting. At least if you have any interest in marriage, in its history, in trying to understand the rationale behind their decision. It doesn't mean you'll agree with their reasons behind their decision, but it'll at least give you an idea of what their thinking was, why they made this decision, and what the judges who disagreed, why they didn't agree. So, Steve, I did send that information to you. Can you be able to post that?
Sure.
Okay, so that will be found on the advancedministries.net website.
You already answered the question for me. You're going to send us a link, it'll be posted.
Very good. So, one of the issues with this discussion is the idea that marriage has been changed or redefined by the Supreme Court. Before we get into asking further questions, I'd like to find out from you, what do you think marriage is? How would you define marriage? So, give me some ideas here so I can use the dry erase board, so I can fulfill my great desire to write something on a board. Yes?
A union between a man and a woman.
Okay, union between a man and a woman. Okay, what else?
Sanctity.
How so? What does that mean?
That God plays a part in our perception.
God plays a part in marriage. How does he play a part?
I like the word that we've been throwing around our church lately is healthy. What makes it operate in a healthy way, relationship-wise and outcomes?
So God plays a part. What else would you say about marriage?
Add to that, Jesus said, what God brought together, let no man separate. So there's something in which God is bringing this union together.
So God plays a part. That would be, let's see, brings together. And so that would also speak marriage as something that's permanent, or at least as permanent as this life. So this is maybe because most of us here are a little older, we would come up with these things. If you were to ask people a little younger, college, high school, whatever, especially those who have grown up with the TV of today, the movies of today, what do you think they might say?
Economic.
Let's live together.
Union between two people.
A what?
The union between two people.
Well, union, yes. So marriage has much more to do than, two people who love each other, right? Romantic love. What movie don't we see that, we just love it when the two get together and it's just so wonderful, right? It warms your heart, right? And you never think, those two are not going to get along once they get married. They didn't get along the whole movie, Why are they gonna get along after they've, fallen in love and now they're married, right? Anyways, romantic love, often, very emotional.
Feel good.
Yes, it feels good. Let's see, emotional, it feels good. We have feelings, romance. This is what younger people see as marriage.
Temporary.
Well, not always temporary. The temporary,
If it doesn't work out, we'll just get divorced.
right, that would be,
Yes, temporarily.
maybe we'll say a little less permanent.
Okay, less permanent.
Or with maybe a back door, right? Yes.
You know, what's interesting about young people in secular society is that they do kind of honor the idea of monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
They're very upset about the whole idea of somebody cheating on another person,
Yes.
whether that's homosexual or heterosexual or whatever.
Right, so there is
So that's
some,
kind of interesting that they kind of taken that in, at least from our traditions.
right, there is some ideal of faithfulness. So if we have this view, we're gonna have a harder time accepting an idea of gay marriage as being a good thing. But if you have this view, if you've grown up with this is your understanding of what marriage is about, and what sex is about, and even if sex in marriage, does this view itself, does this limit marriage to just a man and a woman?
It doesn't, as a matter of fact, if you listen to what a lot of young people say, they'll say, in defense of a marriage not just necessarily being between a man and a woman, they'll say, well, if two people really love each other, if they're committed, that's the first thing that they say in order to justify it doesn't matter if it's two men, two women, whatever.
Right. So here we have a definition of marriage, which is in some ways society's working definition of what marriage and the marriage relationship is about. And so based on this working definition, it becomes, it seems irrational if you hold this understanding of marriage to hear someone say, well, if you're two men and you love each other, that's still not okay to get married.
Mark,
Yeah,
can I add one to the former
Yeah.
definition, above the line, I presume?
yes,
Marriage was a means of creating wealth. In an agrarian society, as you grow a family, you are adding workers to expand your farm, your ability to grow and prosper. In a kind of modern urban society that Dan mentioned, you have less of a demand to do that. As long as you have work, you have a means to sustain yourself. So growing we'll call it the family.
Family workforce.
Yeah, is growing a family workforce. It's making you wealthy.
Right.
In the model of Abraham, with multiple wives, for example, he grew a really, the family expansion of the family makes him wealthy, basically.
right. I think perhaps more in terms of an ideal of what is marriage, most people wouldn't necessarily think of that, but they would think of the children reproducing, or procreation. In more in keeping with this view, we would say marriage does include the idea of having children, of producing new life. In chapter 1 of Genesis, when God says, here's the man and the woman, he puts them together, the first thing he says is be fruitful and multiply. So it's hard to separate that joining together from the reproductive act and producing children. But here, again, in this end, that's not included.
Mutual enjoyment
Right.
is replacing it.
And Dan, I'll have him up in just a couple minutes here, but what was it? The purpose of marriage is to procreate, and same-sex couples can't have children. Again, if you read the court's opinion as to why they came to their decision, they very clearly addressed this matter, and this is something that they didn't just come up with. This is something that they're reflecting the culture, they're reflecting changes that we've actually, probably many of us have approved. We just didn't see the connection.
I
So,
think, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Under the line, the definition from the younger generation,
Yeah,
what have they had to view, what is their view of marriage, say, from their parents and their, you know, the divorce rate has increased, they see the emotional entanglements that maybe some of their parents have had that has caused divorce, and they see the divorce rate, so yeah, it is less permanent, there really is, the cheating, the not being faithful, they realize the importance of that. So, it's what they've witnessed.
right, so things have, and again, it's, in our minds, maybe for many of us, it seems like all of a sudden the court, you know, this just all of a sudden happened in the last just few years, that all of a sudden the gay movement is just really strongly pushing, and they're getting this push forward into the courts, and all of a sudden it changed, and how did this happen?
And you were listening? It's very odd that the courts have taken over now rather than the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Well, right, there's some, you know, debate about who should have been making laws regarding this.
Yeah, right.
And what should be done. But ultimately, we have to understand, as Dan was saying, based on his presentation so far, this is not the first time the government has been involved in marriage and deciding what it is, what should be done about it. And even ultimately here, it's not necessarily even creating some new definition of marriage, it's more reflecting what a culture has come to accept.
I just have a question having to deal with linguistics. Why is it that we as the Christian community has differentiated between the males getting married, male and male, female and female, and yet we say the male marriage is a gay marriage, and this is, they don't use the word homosexual. I don't know what the women use for the marriage. I don't think it's gay, is it?
No, I think for men and women, it would both be called gay marriage.
Really?
Yeah, and people refer to it as different things, but ultimately their goal is to get it to just be called marriage.
Yeah.
Right, and recognized as such. Right, and we'll get into that idea further about wanting that recognition. Dan actually will spend some time in the second half speaking about that. I did want to go back to he mentioned the forms of marriage, and as he's presented it, I believe he made it, wanted you to understand this is, again, not the primary forms as marriage existed, but it did exist in various forms, and has existed, still exists. When I went to Dubai several years ago to visit some friends, I got to meet many college students who were born and raised in Dubai, and they had parents, many of whom had, their father had more than one wife. And there's actually, they actually told me, if you have 2 wives, that's not good because they fight with each other. If you have 3 wives, that's not good because it's uneven sides. 4 wives is the best because each wife has a friend. Right? I mean, that's the way it is. Now, it's not always shiny happy, if by the time you're willing to have 4 wives, maybe you want to divorce one because she's not as pretty anymore. You found someone who is a better looking woman outside of your 4 wives, so you divorce one and get a new one. As long as you don't go above 4 in that culture, it's acceptable.
You can't have them above 4?
No, at least not in Dubai. I don't know that. I believe in the Muslim religion, 4 is the limit.
4 is the max.
Unless you are the.
4 is the max unless I'm the king or.
That's right.
You might be broke too.
You have to be able to afford the wives that you have, according to the law as well. So anyways, all that just to say that, again, even though in our minds we don't necessarily think of polygamy, at least, was it polygyny, one man with more wives, we don't necessarily think of that as different, but that is different. It's just maybe not different enough for us. Dan, why don't you come on up now? Dan, you mentioned cultures have limits. And I think that's an interesting idea. Most cultures do have limits at some point. Right? Like even here, we mentioned the faithfulness, right? Even in this culture of saying, in our culture where we say gay marriage is now, it's approved by the law, a lot of people accept it, they would still there's this ideal of faithfulness, right? Gay marriage wasn't promoted with the idea of like, oh, hey, we can get married and then, but we don't have to be faithful to each other. We're just, it was sold with a picture of an ideal. Whether that's a reality or not is another story. But do you have more in the idea of cultures have limits, even our culture?
Right. Well, for example, I think our culture's sexual morality now is that you have to be, monogamy is defined as being faithful to one partner at a time.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm dating somebody, we can be having sex even though we're not married, but I can't be having sex with somebody else while I'm dating this other person. Yeah. Right? So as long as we're together, we can be having sex, that's fine. Faithfulness is defined as I'm faithful to her while we're together.
So I've heard that described as
Right.
serial monogamy.
Well, serial monogamy is also defined as getting divorced and remarried, and now you have multiple wives just one at a time, right? Even through the legal system. But yeah, like that's what I would define our boundaries are. So if I'm in a regular relationship with somebody and then that involves sex, I still can't go out and sleep with somebody else. That would be considered a violation of that. Or like even in the ancient Greece, you can't go out and have sex with any young boy. You have to be formally married, then the culture accepts it.
Right.
So, yeah.
In a sense, we want this approval, right?
Right.
Culture says there's limits, and whether those limits are beyond what is healthy or not is another story. But like in Iran, there's an issue with what's called temporary marriages. I don't know what the actual name is for them in Persian, but...
Mutwa.
What is it?
Mutwa. M-U-T-W-A.
Mutwa. So they have temporary marriages because, hey, it's not acceptable in our culture to just go out and sleep with someone, but you can get a temporary marriage, for a short time, a very short time.
3 days is the minimum.
3 days minimum,
For what purpose?
What purpose do you have?
Well, you don't have to get married for that.
Well, but
It's
again,
But within that culture, it's not acceptable for you to be promiscuous. This culture defines that as legitimizing that relationship.
I see.
right, so cultures have limits, right?
I did not know that.
We want to legitimize things, and so even in Iran, they say, well, it's not okay to just sleep around. We don't do that. But you can get a temporary marriage for a few days, for a few weeks, for however long you think the fling will be.
And then, of course, once this woman has done this once, now she's damaged goods, right? So she's basically locked in what amounts to a life of a prostitute.
In all fairness, Eddie, if I'm not mistaken, Muslims would give a whole lot more validity to muta marriage, temporary marriage, than just sexual gratification. They would incorporate all sorts of other values and obligations to it. Do they not?
In some certain parts. Iran, they do not hold that much, I would say, perfection to it. It's solely done for the sake of the sex part out of it. In Iraq, it's sort of like the same way you have this in India, to where they do get married for the sake of maybe a long-lasting relationship, or because the husband is away on duty, he's at war, and they go through this long period of time, a year or two, if he's away from his wife and he's allowed to do this. So it all depends on certain places.
And they're supposed to, the men are supposed to give all kinds of provisions to the woman once it's terminated, a certain amount of money and there's a
gold and
formal
houses sometimes.
There's some kind of contract, even if it's a verbal one only, right?
Yep, and the sheikh, which is the Muslim priest, is there officiating all of this before it gets started, so there's a negotiation happening first. So if it's not, anything short of prostitution, I don't know what else would you call it.
Right.
But if it's just a short marriage, then it's just legitimizing the sex. And then-
Pretty much.
But
But it
again,
sounds like it's pretty costly.
all
If
this
they
to
have
say is-
promise that woman gold and a house and.
Well, if you got money, this is nothing to you.
all this to say is that cultures have limits to things. And they're not always healthy limits, but they have limits. And our culture has said, hey, we have a limit. We've gone a little further than it was before, but we still have a limit, right? You should be married, right? But the more we focus on this, even the less, I would guess, the faithfulness part will become less and less important.
Yes, I think social mores is what we're kind of talking about here. But, actually the faithfulness part, I know I said monogamy, I'm glad you wrote faithfulness, because that's actually a better term for what is going on out there in society. Because you know what, a person could start off in a monogamous relationship, and then they can say, you know what, I want our monogamous relationship to be open, and here's the rules. And that's actually accepted too. The real issue is that you're not lying to the other person about what is your relationship. So there's really, monogamy is kind of getting somewhat incorporated. I'm surprised to see my secular friends are so strong on monogamy, and boy, this person cheated on somebody. But it's really not about the monogamy, it's about what's above board and what are the rules. And here's the rules we established, and if this person's cheating on the rules, then it's a problem. So faithfulness is actually better, and I'm not sure that necessarily, and I think we'll slip more and more out of monogamy and more into what are your rules in the relationship.
A lot of people may not know what open means. It means as long as I tell you, I can go and cheat on
Right.
you.
Right. Well, it's not cheating because you told.
Right.
Yeah,
Quote unquote.
right.
But you wanna know something? In the end, I think one or the other has or wants something more out of the situation that they're in than the other.
Yes.
And because in the end, I think one wants a permanent thing and the other doesn't want a permanent thing.
If all this started with faithfulness or being monogamous or being with one person, it started like that ever since Moses, Abraham, no, not really. It didn't start like that. But then in Deuteronomy 17:17, the Lord did not want the king to have more than one wife, therefore be an example. Stick with one wife. So this all started with one wife ever since the beginning.
Mhm.
Now you have Islamic belief to where you can have 4 wives, up to 4
Right.
wives, right? So we have a religious reason for this change. What's the reason for this change here in America?
Well, actually, we're gonna skip through some of this stuff. The government has been involved with marriage in this country and in this culture for many years, and actually in some ways that many of us would approve of. Right? One of the arguments, I believe, had to do with the government doesn't have a place in this, right? It's not the creation of the state doesn't have power to redefine marriage. At one time, if I'm not mistaken, in our country, the law was marriage was between one man and one woman of the same race. Right?
Yeah.
You can look up the court cases, that was what marriage was. The court said, no, marriage is between one man and one woman, period. No longer of the same race. Are we happy with that decision? Right, most of us think, well, that was a good decision. So if we're going to accept that the court can rule on these things, why is it wrong for them to rule on this? I mean, if they ruled in the decision we'd like, we'd be real happy.
There was at the time a classification known as a common law marriage.
Yes.
Which means it wasn't sanctioned by either the church or the government, but it was accepted as an agreed upon relationship between two parties.
Right.
Generally speaking, at that time, it was considered to be a man and a woman.
Right, and I believe, I'm not sure if Michigan still has it. Up until I think recently, different states had different common law marriage rules.
Statutes, yeah.
Right, if you were together for a certain period of time, it was just recognized that you had a common law marriage. but there was different, I believe, different states had different laws. Some didn't recognize them, some did. But at any rate, the part of this decision for the gay marriage with the Supreme Court, it didn't begin there. It actually goes back much further in our country's history. And can you begin to say something
Real
about
cliff
that?
note version
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that. Okay, well, I'll actually walk back over here, because I can push my little keys on the keyboard.
Excellent.
Because this is a part of the speech that I wrote, but then I couldn't get in. Right, here's the Cliff Notes version. I talked about the history of marriage evolution up until the 1800s, right? But by the 1800s, you had the Enlightenment was beginning to come to bear. The Enlightenment ideals. This is where you get your push towards democratic governments and the overthrow of monarchies and other such things. So the Enlightenment movement had these ideals: equality, democracy, egalitarianism, breaking down social barriers, relieving social ills. All these movements began. And among the list of social ills that was being broken down was the unfair shake women had in marriages. Women lost their legal identity in marriage. Somebody mentioned the coverture rules at some point, which I had part of my presentation, but it got left on the cutting room floor. The coverture laws basically meant that when a woman was single, she was termed a femme soleil, single woman. A married woman was a femme covert, a covered woman, covered by the husband. So in English law, a married woman lost her identity, right? You take the Bible, literally, the two become one. Well, the one is the husband, the wife ceases to exist. Women could not file suits, file criminal charges, could not file for divorce. They couldn't do anything illegal. They couldn't, if you were a woman and you invented something, you could not patent it. If you wrote something, you could not copyright it. You know, you had no legal functionality. And of course, you couldn't vote. So when feminism started to try to push against that, when the feminist movements began as part of the Enlightenment, breaking down social restrictions, the first thing they targeted was the vote. So you have the suffragettes, right? But by the late 1800s, it started to turn towards the bad shake that women had in marriage in terms of who gets to decide when the married couple has sex. Okay, well, the old school way of viewing it was men were to work and bring home the money and provide for the woman, and the woman was to cook, clean, raise the kids, and provide sexually for the man. And when there was, the man said, okay, I want it, and the woman said, well, I don't feel like it, she had to, right? And it was actually legal for men at this point to physically discipline their wives if their wives did not live up to their expectations within the marriage. And if you read in between the lines, what it means is you can beat your wife up if she doesn't want to have sex when you demand it.
It's not
Okay.
rape if, you know.
What's that?
It's not rape if she says no.
Exactly, it's not rape if she says no.
So, well, we have to, do you want to stop or just?
Roll with it.
No, we should stop.
We should stop, okay.
Okay.
All right, so to make a real long story short then, just to address the feminist issues, Margaret Sanger comes along to address the issue of women and sex through the use of contraceptives, right? So, 1 minute, and I'll try to zip all through this. Margaret Sanger started a bunch of court cases. She opened a clinic that dispensed contraceptives illegally. The clinic was shut down, but she won the court case. In the court case, the decision was made, contraceptives can be dispensed by a doctor for medical reasons. She conspired to have a doctor from Tokyo mail something to a doctor in New York that was intercepted by the post office. She won that court case and said, doctors can do this for any reason amongst each other and through the mail. Down here, so now everybody could use contraceptives as long as it was from a doctor. By 1965, all married couples could use contraceptives regardless of whether it was from a doctor. By 1972, singles could use contraceptives because it's unfair for only married people to be able to have sex without having kids. By 2003, consenting adults became defined as same-sex couples, and then of course if same-sex couples have the same right to get, you know, to be together, then they should have the right to be married. That's what he wanted me to say, and Scott wanted me to stop, so I'll do that right now.
So, quick question on that, if there is this downward spiral about the contraceptive, at first, it was a good purpose, quote unquote.
It was a good purpose for it.
Right, so then are we supposed to assume kind of the same thing about this gay marriage? At first, there was no gay purpose, and I see a downward spiral here, But is it gonna be the same thing you think with gay marriage? In other words, will it go to polygamous, polyamorous, will it go to,
It could.
okay, so.
Well, I believe there's already people who've applied for court cases regarding polygamy and other such things. Whether that, again, because the court tends to reflect the culture in many ways, it's very likely that those things are not going to be accepted currently. This Oberfelder versus Hodges was not the first time that homosexual union had come before the court. This was just the first time it was accepted in the court.
And it's kind of come up before in some of the things Mark has said, and I couldn't do this justice in my blurting of all this. But what happened is that something got contraception more commonly used, and by the mid-60s, that's when contraceptive use became very widespread, anybody could get it. And that's really what changed our sexual mores within our culture, which changed our marital mores within the culture. People became a lot more promiscuous right at this time. It's probably one of the things that started the sexual revolution.
Right, remember in the marriage that God says be fruitful and multiply, but in our culture here now with contraceptives, we begin to erase this as part of what makes marriage marriage. And so it's a slow progression to this, to where we are today.
All right, okay, great. We're gonna take a 20-minute break up till